everyone, and welcome to the board game Cuppa. I'm your host, Matthew Dunstan. I haven't been here for a while. How's everyone going? This is the morning of Wednesday, the 23rd of June. I am sitting in a, a bit of a different kind of, abode as I normally am, I would guess. Hi, how you going, Taylor? Good to see you. Yeah, it's I for those who don't know, I've come back to the UK for a few weeks, although I'm about to leave soon. So I'm sort of staying in rented accommodation or a friend of a friend, basically. Let me know if the sound is, it feels a bit echoey, but I'm not sure if there's much I can do about that. So apologies if the sound is not to the normal standards. Of course, you know, on my channel, I always try and keep everything to the highest standard, as we know. But how's everyone going? I hope, yeah, it's been a while. Obviously, last few weeks, I've still been over here and just running around doing a lot of things. So streaming, unfortunately, hasn't quite fit into all of that. But it is all slowly getting a little bit easier, a little settling down. So I thought I'd hop on and have a quick stream maybe this morning and reconnect with all you wonderful people. Yeah, so. Yeah, wow, it's been a few weeks. I'm just trying to think of what's been going on in sort of more game designery or game playing or any of that sort of thing in my own thing. I can start with game playing or acquisitions or something. I went to a local board game store here in Cambridge. Well, it's actually a bookstore, but it has an amazing board game selection. And they had a sale on. Of course, the background of this is part of the reason coming back to Cambridge was to actually ship. I had some possessions that were still here, and I had to kind of ship them. Some I've shipped all the way to Australia. They left yesterday. I'll be on a very slow boat for 3 months. And part of that is like a bunch of games that were still here. A lot of like author copies of my own games. Which just needed to move on. But of course, you know, I couldn't resist buying something new, even though the whole point of thing is get rid of things from here. But I got Friedman Fries's Fine Sand and Pandasaurus's Wayfinders or Wayfarers. I'm trying to look for the box now. But yeah, anyway. Morning, Nicola. Yeah, so, and I got to play Fine Sand already solo. It's like a kind of a solo puzzle game. I would relate a little bit to something like Finished by Friedman Fries, which is a fantastic solo game. I think I've talked about it on the channel before. It's kind of like the sorting problem in computer science, if people know that. Made into a board game, and Fine Sand is basically like a deck deconstruction game. Really interesting idea, as you always expect from Friedman. Yeah, apparently like a really great solo game. The solo, when I played it, was quite nice, and it's like a Fable game as well. So you add new cards and it'll evolve over time. So that's great. Hi, Zeniful. Welcome. How are you going? Yeah. So that was good. That was a good purchase. Like it was very heavily discounted, which also, like, you know, I thought, well, I don't know much about the game. I don't think it really ever got any much buzz. But I'd just say check it out if you're a designer. I think Friedman always has. I think you just always should check out Friedman Fries's games, even if you don't play them. Just look at what they're about or look at the rules, because I think he's one of the most kind of regularly inventive and creative designers in the industry. So that was kind of cool. Taylor saying, I was doing well, beginning work on a solo mode. So, oh yes, I saw on Twitter you mentioned something like that, which is not something I have a ton of experience. Have you made a solo mode for a game of yours? How was your experience, if so? Yeah, so I did make the solo mode for Monumental. That was all me. And I was involved with the Chocolate Factory solo. So that a lot of that was David Digby, who was another designer who was contracted by Alley Cat to work on the solo. But he and I worked quite closely, and I contributed something to that process. David did a lot of the work and should certainly get most of the credit. I think there's probably 1 or 2 games that are coming out that we're sort of like included a solo mode, but they're mostly being games where adding a solo mode isn't very difficult, because they're sort of like the games where everyone plays at the same time and they're not highly interactive. So you know, it's quite easy just to like, okay, I'm just working on my own thing and trying to get my high score. But for Monumental, obviously that's a bit different, and I can talk about that because that is a real solo mode. It's an order mode, solo mode. And what was my experience? I think I kind of looked at what was out there. I think there's more and more people talking about that. Like I said, talked about David Digby. He's done a few interviews, I think, of various things. David Turtzi, obviously, is the other kind of big, is the big name in solo modes, and Mons Peterson, I think, the person who like Automa Factory, who does all the stuff with Stonewall. So I would go out. I would just like try and look at some of the I think there's more information out there than was before. So that's one thing. You can look at what people do. I guess I always sort of see it in a very practical point of view. I like to try and not change the core experience that much, because if I can, and again, it really depends on the game. But with Monumental, I wanted it because it was such an engaging game. Like the kind of city management of your deck and all that. That wasn't necessarily highly interactive already. It was a really fun puzzle, and I wanted to keep that. And I realized it's like, well, what do you actually need? Like, where are the things you need your opponents to be interacting with? And I realized, well, okay, there's races for certain kind of objectives or points. Like there's kind of majority scoring for things at the end. And there's obviously like the map and how your opponents are like taking over territories. And I just realized that I needed a way just to easily simulate what an opponent might do. Are they going to, knowing that they only can do a few things, a human player only does one or two things a turn. It could be getting new cards or conquering new territories. And I just basically made a deck, an action deck, an ornament deck, and on the it would flip a card and say, do these two things, And again, it was good because you didn't really have to. But I took away any management of that ornament play. It just acquires stuff. It doesn't have to go through the normal systems of how you get cards and you afford them or stuff like that. So you can kind of shortcut all of that and go straight to just what's the bare minimum that needs to do to kind of recreate that kind of experience for the solo player. So that's my kind of take on it, I guess. And I think that was because the other thing I sort of learned is there seems to be definite preferences in the solo gaming community, which I'm not really part of, towards either like high score experiences versus like really Automa like opponent experiences. Like it's either do I win because I have to beat this opponent or like avoid this failure condition, or is there no winning? It's just I get a score and I want to beat my high score. And I think there are quite strong opinions on either matter. I've definitely heard people say that they really don't like the high score modes. They love the kind of more like where it's competitive and there's a winner or loser. So that's also something to think about. It's not always possible in all games, and I wouldn't, I have made high score solo modes in some games because it just doesn't make sense. The other thing doesn't make sense. So hope that kind of helped. But if you have more specific questions, ask away or things like that. I find this new trade of solo mode really interesting. Even Binding of Isaac: Four Souls, a highly multiplayer game that's designed a solo mode. Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a product of the times, isn't it? That we've all found ourselves, without. It'll be interesting to see whether it continues. There's also an aspect in the kind of bigger Kickstarter games. I wonder that it's like almost a form of insurance. Like when I buy a game and I get it, and I want to feel like I can at least play it in the worst circumstances if it's just me, to feel like I've got my money's worth a little bit. And I think it's reasonable. I think in most cases, doesn't have to be a lot more design work, because again, you're not trying to change the core experience too much. I think there are some easy things to do to create the solo modes. And so if you can include them in the game without really that much more cost in terms of components or like development time, then I don't see why not including it, basically. So thankfully, I found someone who primarily designed solo mode stuff. Oh, great, but it feels pretty foreign to me. I'm not really interested in solo mode myself. But I understand people wanting to just play as pride in my game, so I want to offer it up if I can. Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a really great thing, and it's good that you found someone who is a bit more used to designing in solo modes. I mean, I think even the fact of considering it and trying to include it, you're not going to please everybody, but I think making that effort is great. So that's good. Rob's back in the office. Oh my gosh, doing a day a week at the moment. Oh, I'm gonna have to move from Wednesdays then. If that's the one day that you're not going to be able to catch the stream. But thanks very much for dropping by, Rob. Hope you're well. Yeah, I should say also, I'll say it up front, I'm probably not going to stream the whole hour today because I need to go into town and continue to try and get rid of things, and I have to ship a box back to the Czech Republic, and of course with Brexit and everything now, you have to do all the terraforms and blah 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 blah. All a lot of fun. I feel like I've had a lot of experience of all the various immigration and shipping things through all of this. your game definitely won't please everyone. Well, I hope it can please as many people as possible, and people are open to it. And I look forward to playing it myself sometime. Yeah, so I guess what were the other things I wanted to sort of chat about? Well, I've had I've actually had a chance to meet up in real life with some other designers, which is really, really great, from the kind of Cambridge group, and work on some new games. So like Bez and Alan Paul, we met up. We'd made a game on Bez's stream quite a while ago now, a sort of a flip and fill kind of game, and kind of an interesting approach. We chatted about it, and we were like, oh, we like the game, like the idea we came up with on stream. You know, it was very kind of immediate, and we realized that we wanted, to kind of develop it, but we all had sort of different ideas, especially like three people working on a game is always a bit tricky, I think. So we decided that we would individually develop the game, kind of and independently from each other, without telling each other what we were doing necessarily. And then we all met and played each person's version, which was really interesting actually, because even just as kind of exercise, it means you're kind of exploring more of the possible design space. You see what people enjoy, and there was quite a bit of divergence in the game, because especially for my version, I had actually changed it a lot because I wasn't so happy with what we had, or I had identified a few problems. So that was really interesting. So I definitely, anyone I think that's a really great exercise. If you are ever, like, say, designing in a duo, taking a game and both developing it, it probably makes more sense like earlier in the process when you have kind of more freedom. You haven't like decided on a bunch of stuff. But it was really useful, and I think from that the game has moved forward, and we have a new version to sort of work on, or to kind of concentrate on and try and improve, which I need to do some work on, which I haven't done yet, but I will get to that. So that was really great. Meeting up with, I met with Brett. I've got actually some new designs, which is kind of nice. I sort of talked about a little bit. I mean, it's great with all these narrative games that I've had a lot of work and sort of making new scenarios and stories and things like that. But I had felt for a while a little bit like I just really want to make like a new game, like a completely new design, because I hadn't done that for a while, and I was feeling a bit kind of restless about it. And like part of it is pandemic and lockdown, and you have different your kind of energy goes up and down and things like that. But it was really good to kind of meet up with Brett, and what I normally do is over time I will have collected a whole bunch of ideas, which I'll have just like jotted down in a notebook or somewhere. And I'll often go to Brett, and like in the first 20, 30 minutes, I'll just like kind of like pitch him the games, basically. Say like, oh, I have this idea for this, and I think it could be like that. And I just see what kind of interests him, and from that we found like a couple of games that we're now working on, and one which so I did this kind of tweet thread on the weekend. Check out Twitter. I've got a thread about, and it's come together actually really quickly. It's not finished, and it has a lot of like development and iteration, but it feels like solid, and we know what the game is. And it works, and it's really quite fun. So that was like a really nice positive thing. And yeah, you never get sick of that feeling of like the moment you kind of break through and get something that works, and that that like, oh, this is going to be a game. Might not be a great game, but it will be a game that you'll enjoy, which is good. Rob says, I did that with one of the games. They're kind of splitting up and moving on. We both came up with some rule changes. We tried both and then adopted the one we liked the most. It was quite effective, especially for a lightweight game. Yeah, I also found it really effective. And I agree with the point about the lightweight game. Like the game we're working on is also a very kind of small flip and fill kind of game. And it might be difficult like with a heavier game. But maybe, I mean, with a heavy game, obviously you have more choices, and maybe that's a way that you would both do, like, progress it in different directions, then you would decide to combine it back and take parts of each other's, perhaps. Morning, Bass. How you going? Welcome. And there is a fun... Okay, there's exercise. One person writes a rule that breaks the game. Second person writes a rule that fixes it while keeping the original. Interesting. Yeah, that is an interesting... That could be because it's something cool to do on stream one day. Maybe I'll try and get a co-designer and we can try something like that. Yeah, so otherwise sort of design things ticking over, no massive news or like things I could talk about with new releases yet, but things are going well. It's obviously like everyone's obviously probably read about all the kind of chaos around shipping and everything like that, and it is really tough for publishers, so it's yeah, we'll see where that goes, I guess. I guess the one thing that we might chat about today that I've just has just come to my attention from yesterday. I mean, not that it's always tricky. I don't want to add to like Twitter drama or anything, but I think, I mean, this particular topic is very close to obviously what we talk about here on the stream and game design. So for those who didn't miss it, Rainer Knizia yesterday tweeted out that the kind of start of the story is Grail Games, Australian games publisher, who I say very much at the start, I had signed a game with, Brett and I have signed a game with, met David several times, and we're working on developing the game. It should come to Kickstarter this year. So I'm not exactly like a neutral bystander in all of this. I know both the parties. I know David probably a bit better than Rainer. I met Rainer a few times. But anyway, so Grail Games, Australian publisher, who has published a number of Rainer Knizia's games, Yellow and Yangtze, like Medici the card game, Medici the dice game, Stevenson's Rocket, all these sort of things. Over the years, earlier this year, sort of released an article saying that from the end of the year, they weren't going to be like re-releasing the Knizia games. They'd made a decision that they weren't going to release it. I haven't seen the article since. I don't think it went into like a lot of detail in terms of that, like the thing before behind that decision. Anyway, so fast forward to yesterday, and Rainer makes this tweet saying that actually the reason that the games aren't going to be available from Grail Games anymore was because of him, because of breach of contract. Like he terminated the contract for breach of contract. It wasn't like Grail Games' decision. And it's kind of kicked off a bit of a discussion in Board Game Twitter and maybe in other places about how publishers treat designers and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. And as I said, I'm not a neutral party, and part of it is a little bit motivated, I guess, because I'm not a neutral party in this. So yeah, that's one thing to really make very, very clear, that I'm not this kind of neutral bystander in this, and I do know, especially I know David from Grail Games reasonably well, and obviously we're working on a game together. And I should say I've been very happy with that process. Oh, hey Aaron, how you going? Yeah, I could. Yeah, if you're, well, I mean, I'm not sure. We're talking. I want to chat about a little bit about Rainer Knizia's tweet about Grail Games. I'm not sure if you've seen it. I can probably try and find it so I can put it on stream. At least people can see it. So, long story short, Grail Games at the start of the year says that they're no longer after the year going to keep publishing Rainer's games. Don't actually really remember whether it was saying anything more than that that decision was made. I can share my screen somehow. It's going to be interesting. I don't actually have a. Okay, let's see. Is that going to work? Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this was the treat, and then that happened earlier, and then Rainer makes his tweet yesterday about that his games are leaving Grail Games because of breach of contract. So, and I just wanted to chat about that a bit, basically. And I was saying that have a game with Grail Games at the moment, have had a very positive experience working with Grail Games, haven't had any problems with payment or anything like that. This is not to say that I don't know what the situation is. I don't have any more information than the kind of like, the world has about, like than the public has about the situation. So I don't really want to go into whether like who's right or wrong. All I would say is I suspect there are probably subtleties or details that we don't know from both sides, which reflect on the actual happenings. My own personal thing is I'm kind of a conflict averse kind of person. And I think this has flowed into a lot. There have been a few situations where, and one in particular where me and a co-designer had a game published by a publisher. We had a few problems with that publisher, kind of lack of communication, lateness on royalty payments, although we did end up getting paid those royalties. And there was a point in that whole process where my co-designer really wanted to sort of go public with it and sort of say, on Board Game Geek, like publisher X, we're having problems with communication. They're not, they haven't paid us, etc. And I think also this publisher, someone else had said something about it, so it was kind of following on from that, and it sort of brought up this discussing it. It brought up this point about like going public about these things and accountability. And said too much of the opposite. Maybe we should work together. It would be a great combination. And it's interesting because my co-designer was very much for doing this, and I realized I was very much against it. Again, because of the risk averse thing, but there's also a part of me that is always I'm just wary about kind of litigating. Litigating things in public, I guess, is the point. What I said before, I think is true, that, and maybe I'm a little bit too trusting or something. But I think the thing is, there's just always a lot of details that you don't know, even if you are one of the parties in a particular dispute or problem. You're not going to know necessarily everything that's going on the other side of the table, and it's just tricky. It's tricky to know. And I'm kind of discussing this because I'm trying to work out my own thoughts about it. I'm kind of sort of processing it. I think I always have a bit of a natural distaste for people. It's this dichotomy of like a negative feeling from litigating something in the public because you're kind of giving information to the public, but it's only partial information. It may still, of course, the full picture may be still supportive of that, whatever that statement is, and it may back up what you're saying. But there are also instances where it doesn't, and you just don't know, and it causes a lot of talk and it could cause a lot of ill will, which sometimes is just avoidable and is not helping the situation. That being said, I definitely take that my co-designer brought up a good point, which is sometimes you're not left with any other option, and that can be a way to hopefully expedite or to kind of move the process forward. And I completely understand that. I guess there's like a little bit of like power dynamics in that, I would say. I'd be interested in what people in chat think, because I guess my thought a little bit is also, if there's like a difference in power dynamics between the two parties, that plays a role in like whether something's appropriate or not. Like, I can certainly understand that if the sort of much lower in power party has to resort to something like going public, because that's the thing that will sort of equal out this sort of imbalance of power and improve the kind of negotiating position, or the kind of position of which kind of resolves something. And yeah, so there's like that, and often designers are obviously usually are the kind of the weaker party in this case, because they have fewer ways to kind of at their disposal to make things right, and usually it's the designers are lacking something. It's just difficult to know. I'm just having a look at what's in the chat. Rob says breach of contract doesn't necessarily mean evil. It can just be a slip up and potentially on something pretty minor. And there is a natural tendency to spin rationalize stuff like this when you announce it. Yeah. I mean, again, this is the point. We don't know a lot of information. It's somewhat of a vague tweet. And it's sort of interesting because it's what I haven't said. It's kicked off Dan Thoreau's now talking about trying to set up this website to talk about design issues, or to look out for design. And when I read the initial tweet from Reiner, yes, there's a problem there, but it's not like he's very specific about what has actually happened. But it can all mount up into a heap of unhappiness for the parties involved. Indeed, Taylor, it might be strange that they stated a different reason in their article. I recall reading that reason because it was a discussion point with two to such. Oh yes, the article. Oh, I see. Interesting. So yeah, I have to admit, I think the article's been taken down, so it's a pity that we can't sort of look at it. Oh, I see. Nicola says the article is. Yeah, I will have a look. Sorry, it's interesting. They stated a different reason in the article. Yes, exactly. They didn't. There was no mention of breach of contract or termination or anything like that in the original thing. But yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is, of course, breach of contract can happen for lots of different reasons, I guess. And yes, of course, the most common one is not being paid. But it's interesting that a lot of folks have immediately gone to designers not being paid, when I would say that wasn't necessarily what was said by Reiner. So it's just tricky. Again, we don't have all the information, and it's just, when you put out a tweet that is a bit vague, I would prefer, if I was going to, if I decide I have to go public and talk about these things, and yes, of course, there's like legal problems. Maybe you can't be as specific as you want to be, but if you can't be specific, then why are you just if you're going to create a lot of discussion, I'd prefer it to be around something where people know have the details that are important. It's and yeah, Taylor said Twitter's not great for nuance, but I want to like keep there's like these two things in my head which I'm trying to balance and not like give into one or the other, because of course I side with designers. If designers are not paid by publishers, that's a huge problem. I have had problems in the past with publishers like that, and yeah, I am absolutely supportive of it. If a designer really feels like in the end of the day that's their best way to try and get money from a publisher, I'm completely supportive of that. That is not a problem, and I would never, I don't think, I think it's always up to the individual what they want to do, but I wouldn't say, like if that's your decision, I think that's perfectly fair enough. Yeah, I guess it's just interesting because what I was talking about power dynamics is that this is not my slight take on it. This is not a normal power dynamic between a publisher and a designer, I guess. Reiner Knizia is arguably one of the most powerful designers in the industry, and this is not a very big publisher. This is a one-person publisher. This is not like FFG or Hasbro screwing over like a tiny first-time designer. This is a very different power dynamic. That's not to say Reiner might be completely correct, may very well be correct, but it's just, of course, that nuance I think is also lost a little bit on folk who often will see either their general thing of publishers things like, these big publishers, lots of money and lots of people, blah blah blah. But actually, in some cases, they have just as many people working as a solo designer has as well. Yeah. Sorry. Aaron says, yeah, I have a take that is often considered hot by mainstream board game. I have a take that is often considered hot by. Is this your take? Where's your take? Sorry. So my inherent desire is side with designers. Yeah, exactly. I think that is true. And yeah, it's just, I guess the only thing I would say is also Reiner has some past form in talking about legal matters that are murky, I guess is the point. There have been other things. And that's not, again, it's not to, those are the things that go into my mind trying to weigh out what's going on. And again, we're all trying to like make sense of this, and there's a lot of talking on when again we don't have the full story, and that's why I hate that's a part of why I hate this kind of like public thing, because it just creates a lot of like talking about things that we don't know the information of fully. But at the same time, of course, yeah, I completely agree with like supporting the designer in these sort of things. I do think that the publisher puts an article that says we're discounting Knizia because they don't say, well, that's very troubling. You could just discontinue their games. You don't need to try and tarnish their name in the market. But I'm only reading articles about it, not the original article. Yeah, no, and that's absolutely true. And again, it's part of this discussion, and which I'll try and keep reminding so that it's kept in the mind of the viewers. I'm not this neutral party. I have this relationship with Grail Games already. My experience with David has been so incredibly positive. Definitely in the top echelons of interaction with publishers that I've had, and I've worked with a lot of publishers, and so it's hard for me not to be completely unbiased. But of course, that doesn't mean I can just be too trusting. Doesn't mean that that Grail Games is wrong or not. It's just because you have that personal relationship with something and you feel like you know them somewhat. It's hard to completely take every I suspect there's just more information that we just don't know. This is the take, Aaron. My take is that most board game publishers, especially small ones, are well-meaning folks engaging in an inherently predatory business practice. Wow. Okay. We should have brought that up during the interview, Aaron, because I am very intrigued by the take. Really, I'd love you to, if you'd be happy to kind of like go on a little bit in the comments about what you mean to that. Do you mean, is it towards the fact of like the financial sort of part of how they treat designers in terms of, like lack of royalties or paying royalties late or not paying advances? Or is that the kind of predatory business practice of like sort of like financially sort of unethical kind of practices or something else? Because yeah, I think that's really, that's yes, and more people want to hear more. Yeah, and I don't think that's. I think that's. I think there's good. I guess the good thing that might come out of that is to just have more out of this whole situation is just have, more open discussion about all of these things. And I think that's always a useful thing. I've always tried to be on this channel, try and be as open as I can about, financial things, contract details, things like that. And of course, my natural inclination, which I've talked about, of being conflict averse, means I don't call out people by name necessarily. Of course, maybe that is useful. But again, you've got to be careful about your kind of legal position of defaming anybody, I guess, as well. Yeah. We tried to market these games that are a bit old hat and still didn't, and so they didn't sell, but leaving them behind in outgrowth. And then it turns out the designer pulled the contract. It's very strange. It is very strange. And it also, like, it just doesn't make sense. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we have a certain amount of information. When you put it all together, it is a bit of a confusing story. There are probably some issues on both sides. I hope there will be more information maybe that comes to light that helps, that gives some clarity, which would be really great in the whole thing, I think. And I think if we can have more open conversations about expectations, and also possibly having a better, I think the one thing that would be good to come out of that is to have a better way for designers to kind of raise concerns, or to go down a path of like kind of seeking remuneration or whatever, like for problems with publishers, which is an established path that designers can be pointed to, like new designer, are you having a problem with publishers? Okay, here's this industry body, or here is this independent thing where you can state your case, or they can give you help to sort of to help you with that problem, or to help move through that problem, as opposed to your only way out is to go onto Twitter and talk about it, I guess. Aaron, thank you so much for writing this, Aaron. They pay marketing people, I haven't read it yet, but thank you anyway, thank you for sharing. They pay marketing people a correct rate for their hourly wage. They mostly pay artists a reasonable rate. Oh, sorry, these are publishers. Publishers pay marketing people for their hourly wage. They mostly pay artists a reasonable rate. The designers are expected to gamble the hours they spend on their work for the game to be successful, even though a big reason publishers take the larger piece of the pie is because they're supposed to assume the risk. So the standard methodology is to have a designer work hundreds of hours on a game, sell it for like $5 grand or less up front, hoping for a decent level success. Yeah. Okay, I mean that's and another thing, so that their small percentage becomes a good return on those small hours. Yeah, so that they're expecting that the royalties are remuneration for that. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. And I think, of course, the very sobering thing when you're a designer is to look back on a game. Well, maybe I'll try and include that. I mean, I don't really log hours. I could try starting. It's never really been a thing that I'm very good at or that interested in. But of course, being full-time, it might be an interesting thing to do. Is to reflect on the kind of hourly rate in terms of what you worked on a design, and rarely will the royalties ever kind of add up to that. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, and maybe, it's suggesting that is there a kind of like, do we need a kind of like a thought shift? Because of course, this is not the only industry where this model works for creatives. Obviously, in the book industry, although in the book industry you often have larger advances, but it also works on a sort of a royalty basis. And also there are a lot of authors who are also not making much money. I don't think board games are alone in this kind of royalty model. It's interesting. I think you are right that I think designers and publishers assume risk at different points in the process. Designers assume risk really at the start when they're designing, because when you work on a design, especially if it's not contracted, you're basically assuming a risk because the work you've done may never earn you any money. So you're kind of taking financial risk. I think somebody made a really good point, though, about there is a real difference. The real key difference between the two is that publishers take a capital risk, whereas designers take a time risk. So when I design a game and I don't ever sell it, I'm not in debt. I am kind of in a time debt, but presumably when I designed the game, I had the time to do it. Because it's not contracted, I was a free choice to do what I wanted, and I chose to design a game. Whereas publishers, you know, when they enter a contract with a designer and you go through the normal kind of pre-publication stage and everything, I mean, obviously they are developing capital risk because they are spending real money developing that game, paying for art, paying for development, you know, making manufacturing molds or pre-production things, and which they may never recoup, even, you know, if the game flops. So I guess I can't quite get around, like, I can't argue against that, I would say. And that's why designing, in a way, is a hugely privileged, especially being an independent designer and starting as a designer, is a really privileged position, because you have to be in the positions to kind of take that time risk from the start. You have to be in a position where you can do work with, you know, a big chance that you will never be remunerated for that. But I'm not sure if that's the publisher's fault necessarily. There it says, but why is the art and graphic design considered a sunk cost, but the game design isn't? I guess you would say because there's a chance that the game design could be taken somewhere else. Like if it's not necessarily a sunk cost, because it can be recovered, it can be remarketed and sold to another publisher. Whereas, you know, graphic design, which can be as well, obviously art and graphic design can move to another publisher, but it's more difficult to, I guess. But the thing is, it's also, but just what I came back to before, but these costs are different. You know, the design is a time cost, and graphic design is a capital cost. I guess that's what, and I agree that there obviously, like, that is still a cost. The time cost is still a cost that you would hope to be remunerated for. But I guess that there is a difference in my mind to the two, I guess. Sorry, I've been missing other things. Rory, I'm a new designer, so obviously, oh, hey, Rory, by the way. So obviously haven't made a load of money making games, but so far it's a lot of work for not very much gain compared to my work for hire graphic design work anyway. Yeah, I think that's true. And there's a reason there's not, it's difficult. Yeah, as we sort of said, you are assuming risk in a different way as a designer. Yeah, and I think it's not, one way I always think a little bit about that the difficulty of the industry, in a way, is that I sometimes feel like it is a bit of a buyer's market, like a sort of a, I don't know how to describe it, but like there are more designs than there are publishers or like slots. So, you know, a publisher will normally have multiple games from which to choose which to publish. And a certain percentage of those games have been designed by people who, for them, they don't see it as a profession necessarily. They see it most certainly as a hobby. They certainly expect to be remunerated for that money, but they're not relying on it. It's not expected to be a profession for them. So they have a different approach to it, which is perfectly fine. But it means the overall standard, it's hard to argue, you know, again, because there are so many people who are willing to offer their games for sort of slower money, it's hard to push up the kind of like base value of game design, because you have a lot of folks who are, you know, it's easy for anybody to sort of try and do, and that's great. But of course, it makes it hard to, like, you have, you know, like people are trying to make a profession out of you. You've got people who just want to like make a game and they want to see it holding in their hands. They don't have to make money off it. They're making money other ways. Sort of tricky. Taylor says, I see you're pointing out designers are paid differently than everyone else, which is inherently risky compared to other forms of pay. That is very true. I guess I don't compare. Yeah, but I also think game design is a different. And I think, Aaron, I think you have a very valid point, and it's interesting because obviously you work as a game designer in a very different way to the majority of game designers. You work much more like, I would say, how, you know, graphic designers, other parts, production managers, other parts of the team, you're all members of a team working to create a product with different skill sets, but you're all employed for the same task to produce this final product. You use your different skill sets, work together to produce that. But that's obviously quite a bit different to, you know, independent designers working on a game and then pitching it to a publisher. And then that publisher hiring graphic designers. In that case, obviously the graphic designer and the game designer have had very different kind of involvements in the project and different kind of expectations, I would say, I guess. Rob says, proofreading earns me a better hourly rate, though I've had an advance but not royalties yet. Oh, for game design, especially if you count those never went anywhere prototypes. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And I'm trying to keep. Sorry, trying to find where am I in the things. Rory says, I worked for a long time in advertising and a lot of money is paid out for speculative work that might never go anywhere. I'd always rather bill out my time on a daily basis, but that's not really an option in game design. No, that's a very good point. Very good point. Taylor, if a publisher just paid a designer a large lump sum and called it theirs and did not do royalties, would that be better, more akin to an artist? Arrow said, I would like us to at least have that option. I mean, there are contracts that do that. I mean, it's certainly rarer, but I have heard instances of publishers kind of buying a design outright, which would be similar to that, where it's like basically in advance, it's the same kind of like point in the process, but then they own the entire design and that person doesn't receive any royalties. It's tricky because, of course, that can also be a bit exploitative because then the game designer potentially isn't, the good thing about royalties is that, obviously the profit, well, I'm not a publisher, but, if you're able to reprint a game, that is quite financially, it's good for the publisher because like those old fixed costs, like for art, they don't have to repeat those. Yet they still get to sell the game at the same price. So they're making a higher margin. And so obviously royalties in the best contracts, royalties raise as more copies are sold. So it's like both the designer gets to share in the success of the game with the publisher. And if the game had been sold outright, they wouldn't get that. They wouldn't be able, they would miss out on sharing the success of the game. And that flat fee often would be, I guess it's the trickiness. It's a tricky comparing royalties to flat fees. Sometimes you want the flat fee and it'll be much better. Sometimes the royalties would be much better, but nobody knows. So what's the best thing? Rob, at the moment I'm designing games that nobody asked me to, so I can't really bill that to anyone. Someone asked me to design something, they definitely should pay me. No, absolutely. And this is like, I think this discussion really is about, or at least like in my mind, how I've been thinking about it, is not talking about games for hire. Like, yes, if a publisher reaches out to someone and says like, we want you to design X, that is a very, very different, that's a different take. And that should definitely be paid upfront, and can very much be paid like a graphic designer. Like here's my cost for the project, X $1,000, whatever. I deliver the project, we're done. And that is different. And I think, and in a lot of cases, that is what happens with design for hire. It's what should happen with design for hire. I suppose again, I'm just sticking to the case, which is still kind of the majority, where a designer works on something independently, then pitches it to a publisher. Taylor said, I really like this take. I'm guessing Aaron's take that we're talking about. I need to mull this over, and I'm probably going to mention this to Twitter at some point, which may not be a good idea. Should I tag you if I do, Aaron? So mainly I want people to have the ability to do what I do, provided they have the skills to do so. That's a very fair point. And I think it sounds like, and from I remember our conversation, it seems like a very positive working environment, a very great environment to be a game designer in not in terms of just work environment, but in terms of like the structure, profession, and financial side of things, I presume as well. It's tricky because I suspect that a lot of publishers just cannot offer that. Is this just a straight up answer? And it's not really, I guess it's not really a judgment. And it's not to say that it would be great. Of course, it would be great if more publishers could. But I suspect that it's just, unfortunately, just not possible in a lot of cases. Right or wrong. Nicola, I think a key quote from the articles. I personally hope that Ryan and Kinesia will find publishers for these games that suit him better and sell more copies. If they put a minimum copies in the contract, then a tough year is enough for a small publisher to be in breach of contract tough year is enough for a small publisher to be in breach of contract without any ill intent, but a lack of capacity that might be completely out of their hands. So as Rob said, breach of contract need not be evil. It may just happen. Yeah, I have to admit that, like, I think I wouldn't call that a breach of contract. I would call that kind of like the contract has ended. But you're right that, again, it depends on what words you choose. But yes, that is a way a contract can end if you don't hit minimum sales targets, basically. It doesn't have to be about someone not paying somebody. So, again, we don't have more information, and you're right that these things can sort of mean different things. Yeah, no worries, Nicola, no worries. Taylor said the incentive structure makes it so more people are going to publish over designing. This is just flat out true. So since currently that's where the profits are. That's true, but they also issue more of the capital risk, right? You can go into debt as a publisher. It's very hard to go into debt as a designer. Again, because you're choosing, as long as you choose how to do design. Again, I completely support that. It would be great if more designers could work in this kind of like capacity, like in something like Funko Games. But I still, like, I consider myself fortunate when I know that I can take these things on, but I'm never going to like lose my house over it or something, right? Aaron says, if lump sums were an option, I think designers would start taking these mostly. But then as they made a game for themselves, they might be willing to shift to a more royalty-oriented contract. But I think lump sum contracts are very rare as far as I know. Yeah, I would agree. They are quite rare. They do exist a little bit. It'd be interesting to have a conversation, and it'd be interesting to think what that number is, for a lump sum. Like, what is that value? Which would be interesting. It would also, of course, it would just change the nature of, because I mean, you're kind of, it's more collaborative in the sense that a designer is more involved in publishing a process because financially they have a bigger stake from an earlier part of the process. So you are slightly merging designers and publishers more into an equal ground, which is probably a good thing, even though they have different things. Hey Jay, how you going? Welcome. I've heard of more outright buying for commission games for firms. Yeah, like design for hire and things like that. Aaron, I think that more work in the industry is shifting to here. You have shown yourself to be a reliable designer. Will pay you to design this type of game would be healthy for the industry. I know Sen and Jay often work like this. Yeah, and this is Senpong Lim and Jake Cormier. I'm guessing you're talking about great designers based in Canada. And yes, that is, yeah, I completely, and that's good. Yeah, and you're true. You're right. I think that because board games are doing well, and I think some publishers have good models which allow them to do essentially not exactly have designers on staff, but kind of regularly contracted and are paid up front and can do design for hire. And there are a lot of people who work like this, like not a lot, but there are more people who work like this that maybe are completely visible. And obviously in the toy industry, things like, Hasbro and Mattel, they have a lot of designers who work more like you, Aaron, but we just don't hear about them very much because they're not often on Twitter. And so I think there's also like a bit of disparity in terms of like the discourse, in that it's overrepresentative of a particular type of, designer publisher relationship, because that's kind of where the hobby industry is. But there are obviously large swathes of the industry which we don't hear about so much, which are closer to this kind of, you're paid a salary as a game designer sort of thing. Yeah. Where he says, I'm very intrigued by self-publishing. With publisher royalties, the amount you earn is inherently linked to how well the publisher handles the project, which from a new designer means doing a lot of research on how publishers run their business. Yeah, no, you have a good point. And I think, I guess actually the good thing that might come out of this is, yeah, better transparency about the whole process, more information, especially for designers who are often like, they're kind of like the information poor parties in all of this. And I've said before, like often when you work with a publisher, the difficulty thing is you don't know anything a lot of the time. You have to kind of operate a lot more on trust than a publisher does, rightly or wrongly, and that could be difficult. And out of all of this, hopefully, it might open up more conversations about what publishers should and shouldn't be doing. And for those who are doing things poorly, either they get called out, or they are sort of motivated, or they have enough people who are really questioning whether they want to work with them. And so, yes, of course, I think getting people called out can help that. But as we've also said, like, it's tricky. You've got to balance across everything and information. So, yes, I hope that, and that maybe I need to be better. I don't know what you folks think. I mean, would you like me to be much more? I would have to get legal advice, I think, on some. I would prefer to do that before I start sort of going like, publisher X is terrible, don't work with them. That's why I'm always very happy to personally talk about these things. Like, I have absolutely no problem if somebody messages me and says, look, I'm thinking of working with this publisher. Should I? Or, like, I'm happy to give advice, some very specific advice about, past projects. I'm just always slightly worried, both from a kind of this personal point of view and legal point of view, and putting it all that public. Aaron says, sorry I've hijacked your discussion. No problem at all, Aaron. No, and I really appreciate your input, and thank you very much for contributing to it, because it's something I'm even trying to process, I guess. And to be honest, it's hard to separate myself from, because obviously I've kind of done well out of the current system, I guess. And it's that kind of, survivor bias thing, like, it's like, oh, everything's fine because I made it through. But of course, that's not the case for a lot of people who are in the privileged position I am. So it's good to get other viewpoints to kind of like shift that, but to fight against that bias. We'd love to see more of that. It does mean the apprenticeship would still normally be the current model. Oh, like to before you're like a designer that gets paid by publishers and things like that. Yeah. Aaron, or anyone else, how do you think a smaller publisher, say one-person operation with low cost, should handle outside designers if they actively don't want to be predatory in the ways you're describing it? And Aaron says, it depends. If they're publishing Kickstarter, there's additional margin on the sales when compared to retail distribution. So they could offer a much more enticing percentage on those sales at least. And I should say, I've definitely seen that more and more commonly in contracts, that yes, you do in fact get a higher percentage on the Kickstarters, which is exactly right, as Aaron, and it should be like that, as Aaron says. They might consider hiring designers earlier in their growth rather than hiring 5 to 10 marketing people before hiring anyone for design development. I think we just need to move the ball down the field. As I understand, small publishers can't just pay me 20K up front for a design. Yeah, exactly. I think it's a case of sort of improving things. I think having more developers, and I think the role of developers is becoming, kind of better known and respected, and that's a really good thing. And it's again moving towards, because obviously there are a lot of designers who are kind of increasingly being employed as developers, which is also a really great thing. I think also smart publishers hopefully realizing the value of kind of design for hire, that reaching out to people to design the games they want rather than waiting for publishers, for designers to pitch them games they want, that there's a great value in working with a designer very early in the process. And I have talked about on the stream before about that. That is the most positive usually experience, is to work with a publisher as early in a project as possible, because you both get to craft a game towards that vision that the publisher wants, and you can adapt it to both kind of to craft this experience that everyone's happy with, and everyone can feel sort of like financially stable, because and that's in some ways trying to sell games earlier in the process, because that does give you some financial, you get paid in advance, which is similar to a flat fee, kind of, and of course it's kind of, you're happy to have a smaller advance because you do have royalties, but it does add a bit more certainty, and maybe pushing that, like having publishers sign games earlier on in the process potentially, or increase that, is also another way to kind of like designers and development. Developers and developers is something we should talk about if they're coming to the show. I have so many thoughts on that. Great. Okay, let's set it up, Aaron. When are you free? Which tell me. Do send me a message, and we will have you on in either next week or 2 weeks. Just let me know, and we'll do it again. Yeah, because as people say, like as Rory said, it's been a really great discussing with you, and I think it's always great to have more points of view. So yeah, no, thank you, really, thank you. Rory says, if part of the reason the industry is structured like this because games are sold too cheap, I often wonder if we've been sport in a world where you can buy a very good game with beautiful art design for under £20. Yeah, I think you might be quite right about that. There are very small margins on games, and yeah, I also wonder if the problem is that you really have two halves of the industry. Like you have hobby industries trying to compete with mass market, which just have different margins. They have a different business model, and you can't compete like that. You can't compete on price, potentially. And there has been discussion, of course, around all the kind of shipping problems that game prices are probably going to have to go up, because, and maybe, of course, that might be a good thing in the long term, in the long run, because shipping might recover, but often once prices go up, they don't go down. People get used to the new price, and that maybe might help publishers. And of course, I think it's also why you're seeing, obviously why Kickstarter does so well, because publishers get to sell sort of deluxe products at a higher price point with better margins, and they don't see the reason to go to retail. And of course, in those Kickstarters that we talked about, they can offer designers a better, higher rate of royalty, or sometimes a better advance and things like that. So, it says, it turns out factories will give you a lot better price per unit when you're printing 25,000 you're printing 25,000 for a target order, then printing 2,500 copies for FLGSs. Yeah, exactly. You're just competing on different, like, that's why I think there is a nuance to all this discussion, because just as not every designer is the same, not every publisher is the same either, and publishers are all on different like footings in terms of their financial point, and yet they're all kind of competing in the same market to a certain extent, or the kind of differences are not always obvious, I guess. Anyway, I have to go. Actually, I've almost run out of time, but thank you everyone for really for contributing to the discussion, asking questions. Thank you so much, Aaron, Aaron Dono, NPSC Aaron in the chat. Thank you so much for your input. I really look forward to talking to you more, Aaron, like where you get to actually talk and say your own words rather than having to type them all the time. But thanks again. And my only wish is that please do talk about what you're thinking about. Do feel free to talk about it on Twitter or anywhere. I think I don't ever just let's all just try and be respectful and like I guess constructive. Let's work towards a better kind of environment for designers and publishers, and hopefully something like that will come out of it, which would be great. Cool. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great week, and I will hopefully be back next week. And yeah, with Aaron maybe soon, this week or next. Cool. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.